reasonable doubt. But the country is going to have to wrestle with these facts, and they are sordid. They are, in some ways, technical, right? It's conduct in service of another crime. In other ways, they're so smutty, they're painfully obvious. Michael Cohen didn't have sex with Stormy Daniels. The two pretty women at the center of this, Stormy Daniels or Karen McDougal. Michael Cohen didn't run for president and benefit from those stories staying secret. Michael Cohen went to jail. It feels like that is maybe a basic, topic sentence under which a lot of these witnesses will be supporting that story and that plot with their testimony.
Right. I think the idea is to almost not quite extract Michael Cohen, but to build the evidence around him.
Right.
He's going to probably come at the end in terms of a witness. But I was just, even today, I'm still struck by the new information that came out, and we're going to have narrators throughout. We heard about text messages that went back and forth with the National Enquirer when they went out to see Karen McDougal, one of the women who had a relationship with Donald Trump. And they were trying to confirm whether the story was true. We're going to hear what those text messages were. There was an election night. There was a message that went back and forth between one of the lawyers involved with that was representing Karen McDougal and Stormy McDonald's, and somebody at the National Enquirer saying, "What have we done?" We're going to see a lot more information like that come through. And I was also David Pecker was not on the stand for very long, but just hearing the details that we got, the idea that, they would, if a story, reporters were they were given about $10,000 to get that story. And I wasn't clear if that included payment to somebody or expenses in payment, but anything above that, he would have to sign off on it. And what that told me was the payments that went to Karen McDougal, that went to Stormy Daniels, were unusual. They were high, even the one that was related to the doorman, which I think was $30,000. These were extraordinarily high payments. We're going to hear more details from David Pecker about just how unusual these payments were. So that sort of information is now coming out, and I think every day we're going to hear the devil will be in the details on all of this.
Tell me, David Pecker was the first witness, but there was some other business, and we'll get to that in a minute. But can you just describe that scene to us of David Pecker? He's sort of launched a million names, but the man himself, the Trump ally, so valued that Trump held a dinner to thank him. Catch and Kill, not in dispute. He had a different name for it. Checkbook journalism. But just, can you take me through the moment where he walks in, takes the stand, and starts talking? Yeah,
he comes in and he walks up to the stand and he has a huge grin on his face. He just seemed very approachable. He seemed calm, and he sat down, obviously gave his name, and some of the first questions were because they wanted to establish his phone number, what his cell phone number was at the time. But he seemed very at ease and approachable. He was very likable, and I suspect he's going to play well with the jury. That was my real takeaway. And I know Lisa had some other observations, too, that I think were interesting that we've talked about.
My big takeaway from David, and I agree with Suzanne that he was very friendly and jovial. I was joking around with her during a break that he had sort of big grandpa energy. You could picture him sunning
I'm just
himself.
thinking of a million covers of the National Enquirer and wondering what mom wants big grandpa showing their kid the cover of the National Enquirer. But right. Yes, right. I get what you're saying.
He was a gentler person than I think we were expecting him to be. What he wasn't was rehearsed. And Joshua Steinglass, who was trying his darndest to get clear answers from David Pecker to some of the foundational questions, like how does checkbook journalism work? How do you develop a source? He was sort of talking about the underbelly of tabloid journalism, right? If you're in their world, the source universe that matters is a very different universe than our universes.
Sometimes.
It's hotel workers, people who work at dry cleaners, people who work at limousine companies, just all of hearing those details.
And you imagine them handing out, the reporters have $100 bills in their pocket. He didn't say this, but it was the idea that you're giving them money to get these stories means you're probably handing $100 or $200 or $500 to a doorman. He had that level of detail. And then he said, and it was interesting that the metric that matters, it's a weekly, was the sales. And the only thing that mattered was the cover. And this is going to come out because we're going to start hearing about the stories they caught and killed, the stories that Donald Trump planted, and the favorable ones about Donald Trump that he pushed forward. But there was, he's had covers about Ben Carson has been brought up, about the fact he was, he had guilty of
Ted Cruz.
Yeah, and Ted Cruz. And we're going to probably hear details about, potentially about not only how much those issues sold, but how much money went into getting those covers together.
And in terms of laying out the elements of a crime, what does the prosecution want from David Pecker?
Prosecution wants David Pecker to establish the formation of the conspiracy. It's that unholy trinity of Trump, Michael Cohen, and David Pecker. And they, to Vaughn's point about sort of unspoken, unknown details, according to the prosecutors today, it was Trump who invited David Pecker to come to this meeting at Trump Tower in 2015. They were joined by Michael Cohen there. When we've seen that meeting described in public filings, Nicole, it comes across really differently. They say there was a meeting between Cohen and Pecker and a third member of the Trump campaign. We know from our colleague Tom Winters reporting in 2018.
Do we have that? Do we have Tom Winters reporting from the... Okay, we went back and we found, it actually circulated on social media. Tom Winter is a pro's pro, and actually probably the kind of reporter that lives in both worlds, right? That does talk to those kind of sources that know where people move and how they move and with whom they move. Not that you aren't, you are as well. But let me show you Tom Winter. This is Tom Winter's live report on that day about that meeting and who was in it.
The first discussion of this so-called catch and kill comes up in August 2015. And so the Wall Street Journal reported back in November, and NBC News has now confirmed that, in fact, the other campaign official in the room is the guy at the head of the campaign himself, Donald Trump.
So that was established through NBC's reporting and others back in 2018. Just explain why that's important and why the characterization. I mean, the Trump telling people that know Trump know that he's such a maniac for the details. He cast a cabinet. He didn't like John Bolton's mustache. He doesn't like the walk-up music. But they have this alternate myth that he somehow floats around and doesn't know who's in his office tower. This was his meeting.
Yes, it was his meeting, and he's micromanagerial to a core, as you just noted. And the legal import of that is to show that Donald Trump had knowledge and intent to influence the 2016 election all along through the cooperation of the National Enquirer, to bury stories about him, to accentuate his positives, and then to write damaging stories about his rivals like Ted Cruz and Ben Carson. And, you played this portion of Todd Blanche's opening when he said, I have a spoiler alert. It's not a crime to influence elections. It's called democracy. Well, that's like saying, I have a spoiler alert. It's not a crime to lie. It's called the First Amendment. Except that there are instances in which lying is a crime, and there are also instances in which non-disclosure agreements can be criminal, where they are entered into for the purpose of unlawful in-kind or corporate campaign contributions or individual contributions. That is why Michael Cohen went to jail, not because NDAs are criminal, but because of the purpose to which those NDAs were put.
Harry, what struck me is that I know lots been said. I know Trump has access to excellent lawyers and by all accounts has a couple defending him in this case, as he should. But it seemed once again to be, as Lisa's saying, a political argument. And I understand you're trying to persuade 12 people to come to your side, but it didn't seem that they were going to dispute all the facts. They were just going to dispute what the definition of a crime was.
Well, that's exactly right. And this is where the political, the significance of this trial is the political and legal really do come apart. It seemed to me that Blanche was trying to make an argument that Trump was clean as a whistle, did nothing bad. And that's going to be very problematic once, for example, Stormy Daniels or Karen McDougal take the stand. You might have played this differently. You might have said, yes, he's a jerk, but not a criminal. And instead, perhaps at the behest of the client, they are actually taking the tack of, nothing could be, everything he did was clean as could be. And that's just going to be very, very hard to substantiate. And the sort of significance of Pecker is that all these things we know very sort of in a sketchy way become vivid and real and bring home. And I think it'll be extremely hard for Trump to just try to disavow the entire corpus that the DA is building. But that's, I think, the task they've taken upon themselves.
So our viewers are so steeped in all of this. I want to dive into the evidence at this point. And Harry, the Access Hollywood tape, we covered this last week. A transcript has been permitted. Let me show you some sound. The jury will not hear it, but I believe some of the transcript was already read into the record. So here's some of the Access Hollywood tape.